glorifying God's name. And tomorrow is about the prophets. Somehow I got landed with the more technical side. So I guess you win some and you lose some, but obviously it's all Torah and it's all the Rambam, and we got to know the whole Torah. So we have to do the technical stuff also. So you'll forgive me that today is going to be a little bit more technical, but I think we should get going because we don't want to go beyond 1:30. At 1:30, the whole computer self-destructs, I believe, or something. Anyway, I trust you all had a wonderful Shabbos, and you're going to have a great week ahead, even though it's not the greatest week in the Jewish calendar. As we know, Wednesday night and Thursday is Tisha B'Av, our national day of mourning. And the week in which Tisha B'Av falls has a special halachic status of its own. The mourning sort of intensifies. But be that as it may, on Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to learn just any Torah. But today we are allowed to go full steam ahead. So this chapter follows on previous because we had been learning about idolatry. And concerning idolatry, the Jewish people were commanded when they come into the promised land, it is a holy land. And the Canaanite nations were ejected by God for the Jewish people to be given, bequeathed Eretz Yisrael as the promised land. But the deal is, God keeps his promise only if we keep our side of the bargain. Our side is that it has to be a holy land. And one of the most obvious ways in which the land remains and becomes and remains holy is to wipe out any semblance of paganism, of idolatry, of the depraved lifestyles and immorality of the Canaanite nations that preceded the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. So one of the biggest obligations upon the Jewish nation when they entered Israel was to eradicate all forms of idolatry. The idolatrous nations, I think you learned already that it was only if they would accept God and give up idolatry they could remain. Otherwise, they had to leave. And all forms of idolatry, all pagan temples and altars and things had to be destroyed. Now, this is not our style, we're not really the Taliban. But on the other hand, you have to understand, idolatry had a huge, very, very powerful attraction to ancient minds and hearts. In fact, the rabbis went so far as to say that idolatry would be, say, compared today to a combination of all the attractions of money, power, and sex. If you put them all together, that might equal the powerful attraction and allure that idolatry had in ancient times. We can't really relate to it because who wants to go bow down to a statue? It doesn't make any sense. I built a statue in my workshop yesterday, and now I'm saying he's my God who created me and the world. It's completely absurd. But the fact is that in ancient times, this was the done thing, whether you worship the sun or the moon or the stars or Baal or whoever. And so it does seem, when you read the laws of idolatry, it seems very extreme and radical, and it does seem Talibanesque. But the fact is that we had to eradicate any vestige of those depraved pagan practices from the Holy Land, especially as we were starting out. Then it says, eradicate and destroy all idolatries and all foreign gods. Do not do that to Hashem your God. So from here we have the basis for this chapter, chapter 6, that we're not allowed to destroy, erase, obliterate, negate in any way the name of Hashem. And so you know that we are careful today when you get a document of Torah not to just chuck it in the rubbish bin when you finished reading it. We have something called Shemos. Shemos literally means the names of Hashem, but it refers to any written, printed documents that have the name of Hashem or that have Torah on them, we don't just chuck it out in the rubbish. That's forbidden and disrespectful. What happens to a Sefer Torah? God forbid. We're gonna read this just now. We don't just throw it out. Tefillin, mezuzahs, which become aged or apostle, we bury these things. You remember, was it a year or so ago when they had that terrible fire in Cape Town, in the Maharsha, the old Arthur's Road Shul, and a number of Sefer Torahs tragically were burnt. And I don't know if you followed the news, but they had some weeks afterwards, they actually had a funeral with a whole funeral procession with prayers for the remnants of those destroyed Sefer Torahs, and they were buried in a special place in the cemetery. So this is because we treat the name of Hashem and Torah, which expresses divinity, with the greatest respect. And so that's what this is all a long-winded introduction to this chapter 6, which is technical, but it's the laws of not in any way destroying the name of God. Rabbi Chazdan, I seem to have lost the, oh, there we go. Okay, we're back on track. So you all see the text on your screens. Yesodei HaTorah, the foundations of Torah, chapter 6. Whoever destroys one of the holy and pure names which the Holy One, blessed be He, is called, is liable for lashes. Okay, that's also sort of old biblical law, but it was not funny. It was a serious penalty, and you probably you certainly didn't enjoy it. It was quite painful, but in fact, on another whole subject we don't have time for now, but the whole idea of sending people to prison is not found in Jewish law. In Jewish law, either there was monetary penalties, or there was lashes, or God forbid, in some extreme cases, which was very rarely sentenced and handed out, the death penalty existed in Torah law. It didn't happen too often, but it was there. And so prisons are a huge failure. We very rarely do we see a prisoner becoming rehabilitated. Things just get worse over there. So here you gave the person lashes, and then they got the message, and then they hopefully wouldn't repeat the offense. So so we're told here that because the Torah said that you have to destroy the idols, and you shall do not do this to Hashem your God, therefore we have all the following laws about not erasing or destroying the name of God in any way. Halacha number 2, he goes into the details. How do we define the name of Hashem? So the name of Hashem is in Hebrew, and he gives here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different names. There's seven names, the 7 famous names, which are the main well-known names by which Hashem is called. Number A is Yud Kei Vav Kei. What we normally say, when we say Hashem, we are saying Hashem instead of saying A-Do-Nai. But now even that, A-D-O-N-A-I, how is it really pronounced? Don't say it, because you're not allowed to say it. But you know, there's those that other Christian group that sometimes rings your bell on a Sunday. They want to sell you their Bibles. J's Witnesses, Jehov, etc. I don't want to say it. You're not allowed to say it. A Jew is not allowed to say that word. Please don't say it. Just say J's Witnesses or the Witnesses or something if you want to talk about them. But that's the way that the Kohen Gadol would pronounce Hashem's name in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur Day. We don't even say that ever, even on Yom Kippur. We say A-D-O-N-A-I. And that's only when we're davening or reading the Torah. If we're just conversing or just learning as we are now, we don't even say A-D-O-N-A-I, we would say Hashem. But the original, the purest form is the Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, which you can work out how that is pronounced. as I said, or as he says, Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which is the other way, Adonai. So that's the most famous one. But there's also 6 other names of Hashem. He says El, but we would pronounce it Kale. Then you have Elokah. I'm not pronouncing it the way it's read. And number D, I'm also saying Elokim, because you should not say it the way it's read. That's a holy name. And Elokai, which is my God. Then there's Shaddai, which we also careful not always to pronounce. Shin Daled Yud. Some people say Shakai instead of the way it's read. And that's Shin on your mezuzah. You know, on the front of your mezuzah, there's usually a big Shin. That's the initial of this name of the letter F, S-H-A-D. And it means the God who protects us. And then finally, G is again, Tzvakot. I'm also putting in the K instead of reading it as it is. It literally means the host, Tzava is the army, as we know. Tzva Hagana Yisrael, the IDF. So it speaks of God as the commander-in-chief of the world. So these are 7 different sacred names of God, and you're not allowed to destroy, you're not allowed to erase these names. Okay? So a sofer, a scribe, who is writing a Torah or a tefillin or a mezuzah, he more than we, he has to be particularly scrupulous and very, very careful how he's writing, because if he makes a mistake, it's a problem to erase. So therefore, he has to check and double check and triple check whenever he's writing Hashem's names. Okay, now, number 3, all the letters which are connected to God's name but are placed before the name itself may be erased. So, for example, the Lamed of Lashem, let's say you're saying to Hashem. To Hashem would be spelled with a Lamed and then Hashem's name. So the Lamed is just sort of a prefix. It does not have any sanctity of its own. The Bet of Belokim, if you wanted to say that. So the Bet has no sanctity. You can see it there in the Hebrew as well. So that's not a problem. Similarly, letters that are written after the name of Hashem. So here he says, letters which are connected but are placed after the name, like the final chaf of Elokecha, or the chaf and final name of Elokechem. Like at the end of Shema, we say Hashem Elokechem Emet, right? Elokechem, Hashem Elokechem, your God, in the plural of you. Emet is true. So Elokechem means your God. The sanctity, the sacred part is of course Elokah, but Elokechem, your God, is part and parcel of the name, the way you have written it. So therefore, you may not erase those final letters either. If, however, somebody would, since they are not the actual name, they will not cause the penalty of lashes. Okay, where are we now? Now, number 4. Number 4, if one writes the Aleph and the Lamed of the name Elokim, or the Yud and the Hey of the name Yud Kevavke of Hashem, these letters may not be erased. So Aleph Lamed is already a name of Hashem, as we saw before. Yud and Hey is also a name of Hashem, which is also used. He didn't mention one of these 7, but is also used as a way of expressing Hashem's name. So that may not be erased either. However, if you write the Shin and the Daled of the name Shakai, or the Tzadi and the Bet of the name Tzvakot, those letters may be erased because in their own right, you have not yet spelled Hashem's name. So that's a difference there. Let's move on to number 5. Now, there are many ways in which we refer to Hashem. Besides these 7 official names, there are many other ways in which we refer to Hashem throughout our prayers. We refer to God as Chanun, Verachum, Hagodel, Hagibor, Vahanoira, etc. The gracious, merciful, great, mighty, awesome, faithful, jealous, the powerful. God was awesome long before awesome became a popular word, Today, everything is awesome, but really the real word awesome with a capital A was invented to describe Hashem. In the beginning of the Amidah, what do we say? Baruch atah Hashem, Elokei, Hokel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vehanora. We speak of God who is great and mighty and awesome. Awesome meaning awe-inspiring. Not like, I found a parking space. Awesome, Today, the word awesome has been trivialized. We're speaking about holding God in awe. So all of those are wonderful descriptive adjectives about God, but they are not holy names. You could use them for other things. So therefore, they may be erased. Even if you wrote them about God, but they could be erased because it's not one of the official names of God. Now it gets a bit more complicated. Number 6, when God's name is written on a utensil, one should cut off God's name and bury it. If it's engraved on a metal or glass utensil and one melts the utensil, one would be punished by lashes. So rather cut off the name and bury it before you go start melting or destroying the utensils. Now, here's a difficult one. If God's name was written on one's flesh, one should not wash or anoint oneself. So what happens if you write Hashem's name? I'm not even talking about tattoos now. There's a famous musician in town here who has these huge tattoos on his arms. He's a mate of mine. We did work together with Jewish concerts. He's got famous Hebrew expressions tattooed on his arms. But I don't think he has Hashem's name. But what does he have? If you have Hashem's name on your arm, how do you take a shower? So tattoos actually don't get erased. But if you just wrote it on a pencil or you wrote it with a pen, and now you're going to take a shower, so you're erasing Hashem's name. So it's not a good idea to write Hashem's name on your body. Otherwise, you may not be able to take a shower for the rest of your life. Then we have another problem, and that is no one may stand in a place of filth. So if it occurs that such a person must immerse because of a mitzvah, if he has an obligation to go to the mikveh, what is he doing? Now he's going into a bathhouse, and everybody's walking around in their birthday suits, and he's got Hashem's name there. You're not supposed to bring a sitter into a mikveh, into a bathhouse. So this is very strange. He should wind reeds around the name and immerse himself. If he can't find reeds, he should wind his clothes around it, but not too tightly, because the water has to get under the cloth. And for a mikveh to be kosher, the water has to, the whole totality of the person's body has to be immersed in the water. So it's quite a tricky one here, that you have to, on the one hand, cover God's name in this unclean place, in this unrespectful place where people are not clothed. On the other hand, you have to get the water there. So it's quite a strange situation. The bottom line is, please don't write God's name on your body. Where are we? Let's look at number 7. A person who removes even one okay, now we're not talking about erasing God's names. Now we're talking about destroying the house of Hashem. Okay, we were supposed to eradicate the temples of idolatry from the Holy Land when we came in with Joshua, but we're not allowed to do that to the holy house of Hashem. So therefore, a person who removes even one stone from the holy altar in the holy temple in Jerusalem, or the temple courtyard, which is holy, the whole Temple Mount is holy. In the olden days when the temple stood, you couldn't walk into the Temple Mount with your shoes. You had to take your shoes off. You couldn't spit. You had to walk backwards to leave the place. It was a holy place. You had to treat it with the greatest of respect. Now you're going to go start dislodging stones and bricks, and it's like you're destroying the temple in a small way. So it's very strict. So you may not remove even one stone from the altar, the building, or the courtyard with a destructive intent. Here's the key, and here's the condition. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it to destroy? Are you a terrorist? Are you a juvenile delinquent? Are you just in a destructive mood? You're angry with God. You didn't win the lottery. You're taking it out on God. You're gonna mess up His temple. If you do it with a destructive intent, you'll be liable for lashes. As it says, you shall tear down their altars. As we said, the idolatrous pagan altars. Do not do this to Hashem. So there's a clear biblical prohibition to destroy God's temple, which means that if you did it deliberately, you would be subject to lashes. Similarly, a person who with a destructive intent, there's a second paragraph now in Halacha 7, burns wood consecrated to the temple would be liable for lashes. So they had wood for the altar there. They had stockpiles of wood in the temple. If you then now want to destroy that and you use it for other stuff, even he doesn't speak about it here, but there's another whole law. If you take temple property and use it for your own mundane use, it's called sacrilege. It's called me'ilah. So let's say you want to make a braai and you don't have any wood and the shops are closed. Okay, no problem. I'll run up to the Temple Mount. They got big stockpiles of wood there. You take some wood there and you take it home and you make a braai. You're in big trouble, man. You just committed sacrilege. That wood is holy. That's meant for the sacred use only. But here he speaks about if you burn the wood of the temple destructively, that would again be subject to lashes, because the pagans, you read about this the other day, what would they do? They would plant something called an Asherah. What is an Asherah? It was a very nice tree that the pagans would plant near their altars, near their temples, to beautify their temples. So you're supposed to burn down their Asherah trees, which are associated with their idolatrous temples. Do not do this to Hashem. So therefore, that would be, again, subject to lashes. Number 8, it is forbidden to burn or to destroy by direct action any sacred texts, their commentaries, their explanations. Okay, this is what we spoke about before, Shemos. Today, we have actually, it's a social problem, because there's been an explosion, exponential growth, Baruch Hashem, in the study and promulgation and publications of Torah journals. There's an explosion of Torah study around the world, thank God. It's taking us closer to Mashiach, obviously. And every community, ours is Baruch Hashem. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, people learning now on Zoom like this year, and dozens of others like never before. We have a 2-minute Rambam thing on WhatsApp in our shul, and we have over 300 people listening every day. There's been an explosion of Torah, and with an explosion of publications of Torah. And I have here something called Chayenu, which is published weekly, and there's tens of thousands of people who subscribe to this, and it has the daily Rambam and the daily Chumash and all sorts of Torah to learn every day of the week. It's very convenient, very handy, especially if you're traveling, if you're on the Gautrain train, or you're on the New York subway, or you're in a lift scheme, or you're in a doctor's waiting room. You can keep yourself occupied meaningfully. But what happens the week after? This is already last week's. Now I got a new publication this week. What do I do with this one? It has to go into Shemus. You can't just chuck it out. So there's an explosion of Shemus. The Chevra Kadisha in West Park Cemetery, just I think a couple of years ago, built a whole new little section to house all the Shemos that's coming in, all of the Torah publications that are being published and are no longer needed. You're finished with them, or they get old and torn and whatever, and you can't just put it in the rubbish. So it gets to the cemetery and gets buried. So this is number 8. It's forbidden to burn or destroy by direct action any sacred text, the commentaries, the explanations. And if you did it deliberately, again, you would get stripes for rebelliousness. It's called makas mardus. What is stripes? It's not that you become a general. Stripes is lashes, okay? Because they leave stripes on your back. But this is called makas mardus. It's not a biblical lashes penalty, it's a rabbinic penalty. So the rabbis had the authority to give a person lashes if they did something, even though it was not by a biblical prohibition. In order to keep the faith and to keep the community compliant, there was authority given to the rabbinic leaders in every community to sentence a person to stripes by rabbinic law. It's called makas mardus, or as he translates it here, stripes for rebelliousness. So to what does this apply? To sacred texts written by a Jew with a sacred intent, meaning holy books. What's the definition of a holy book? Listen to this, it's very interesting. However, should a Jewish heretic, okay, an apocoides, an atheist, a rebel, a big cynic, he decides to write a Sefer Torah. You know, in the olden days, there were people who went to yeshiva and they were learned and knowledgeable, but then they lost their faith. Maybe they lost their faith from the Holocaust or God forbid, whatever. I'm not here to condemn anybody. And they became anti-religious and they became dafke. So what would he do? He might want to write a Torah. And maybe he wants to make a big public burning of the Torah. He's in a very rebellious mood, this individual. So here he says, if a Jewish heretic, an atheist, writes a Torah scroll, the whole scroll, including the names of God it contains, must be burnt. This is radical. A Jew has to burn a Sefer Torah. It's unbelievable. Why? Because the intent is important. What was his kavanah? What was his intent when he was writing this Torah? He doesn't even believe in God. So when he writes the name of God, he's not thinking about God, because as far as he's concerned, God doesn't exist. So to him, it's a big joke. To him, it's just an act of rebelliousness. So therefore, this Torah written by a heretic has no innate sanctity. In fact, it's a disgrace. And therefore, you have to destroy it. He doesn't believe in the sanctity of God's name, did not compose it for sacred purposes. He considered it similar to any other text. It's the same as Shakespeare. So therefore, it does not become holy. And because the whole thing is a disgrace and a rebelliousness against God, therefore you have to burn it. So no remembrance should be left of this. In contrast, if a Gentile writes God's name, he's not necessarily doing it with deliberate animosity and hatred of Hashem. There it should just be buried. So for a Torah to be a Torah, a proper kosher holy Torah that we stand up and we kiss and we read from, it has to be written by a pious Jew, by a sofer, not just somebody who learned calligraphy, but a pious Jew who knows the halachas and who, the scribes that I know, before they write a tefillin scroll parchment or a mezuzah or a Torah, they would make a point of going to the mikveh every morning before they would write even one letter of a holy Torah. I don't know if every scribe does that, but certainly you have to approach it with a sense of reverence and respect. Number 9, to conclude, all the names, this is the last halach of this chapter, so we're coming to the end, number 9. All the names of God written. Okay, so there's certain passages where you have the name, you see in the Hebrew, you see Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud from Bereshit, chapter 18. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Very good. Gee, he's clever, this guy. I don't know how to do that, you see. These young rabbis, they're teaching me a lot. I hope I learn. Okay, so that looks like God's name, right? But not every time that word appears in Torah is it necessarily sacred. So he's going to give some examples now. So in the passage concerning Abraham and the angels, where that word is used, my Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, that is speaking of Hashem. So therefore there the word is sacred and it may not be erased. However, in the story a little bit later, in the same parsha, we have the story of the angels going to destroy Sodom and the story of Lot, Abraham's nephew. What do we see there? And Lot said to the angels, "Oh God, no, I have found favor in your eyes and you have saved my life." So that there too, Lot is speaking to Hashem. So that is the one exception where it will be sacred, but the other names of God written in the story of Lot are not sacred. So you have to know, usually with Abraham it's sacred, usually with Lot it's not sacred, but there are exceptions. Then there's other stories throughout other books of the Tanakh, not the Chumash. You may not be familiar with these. There's a story of in the book of Judges, chapter 20, where Givat Binyamin, passage in the hill of Benjamin, all the names of God written in the passage of the hill of Benjamin are sacred. All the names get written in the passage concerning Micha. Micha is not sacred. Don't know what happened to our... okay, we lost... sorry, looks like Rabbi Chazdan had to go. So if you don't have the text in front of you, we're coming to... it's the last few lines. Let me just tell you. So then there's Shlomo, King Solomon, in Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs. When he uses the word Shlomo, it's actually sacred, except for one, Ha'elef Lecha Shlomo, you Shlomo may have the 1,000, that's the exception. But otherwise the word Shlomo in Shir HaShirim is actually a name for Hashem. And finally, the word Malchayo, which is the Aramaic of king, Melech, in Aramaic it's Malchayo. Every mention of the word king in the book of Daniel is not sacred, except for the one, you are the king of kings. Otherwise, the prophet Daniel was actually referring to the king of Babylon. Who knows his name? The famous king of Babylon who destroyed the first temple on Tisha B'Av? Nebuchadnezzar. Thank you very much. So thus ends chapter 6, and I'm happy to take any questions or chat a bit, but officially the shir is over. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm not running away. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and chat or ask for a moment, I'm still here.